Hello and welcome to Beyond the Scenes. This is a space where I have interviews with friends, people in the film industry, artists, creatives in general. My name is Andres Cuervo, and I have the privilege of having in the studio my good friend Justus Page. Welcome, Justus.
What's going on?
Two things. If you were able to come up with a travel machine, time travel machine, what would be the period of time that you'll say, okay, if there's only one period of time, one place in the world, in history, that I could travel back in history to, what would that be? And the second one is, if you were given a chance, no budgets, limitations or anything, and you were to make a historic movie, what would that be for?
Holy Lord. Those are some big questions, man. And they're hard ones to answer because I think about them all the time and my answer changes all the time.
Okay.
Because I'm always studying and I'm always learning new things. Like the thing that's fascinating me at the moment is the thing I'm going to answer more about right now, but I definitely think like there's a certain period I know I would never travel before it, just because of like advancements in medicine and social progress and stuff, where you'd be like, yeah, not, I'm all right. But, there's definitely, there's a semi-sweet spot, I would say, in probably the post 1870s up to maybe the end of the 1800s. That would be super fascinating time period to be in the era of European peace after the Franco-Prussian War, where the major European powers weren't really warring with each other until World War I. There was like that weird 40-year span where they were all just pretending to be super chill with each other. It would be really fascinating because it was a really big time for industrial development and scientific progress and all of that stuff.
No tariffs.
Yeah. Holy Lord, no, they loved tariffs back then.
Yeah.
They were all about that. It'd be fascinating. There's not one specific thing I could point to because I think there's too many things where I'd be like, it would be really cool. And then I go,
In what part of the world?
I mean, it's probably a bit of a cop-out answer, but I'd definitely say Europe.
Italy?
Yeah, I mean, my go-to right now is I would definitely love to have seen the Risorgimento firsthand. Would have been crazy. Just because to this day I'm not convinced Italy should exist.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, Risorgimento history is a whole rabbit hole to go down, but the unification of Italy,
Yeah.
which was completed with the conquest of Rome in the 1870s, was in some senses it's argued it wasn't completed until they acquired some territories after World War One. They're like, okay, now we're really a united country now that we have these pieces we've been missing. But
Because imagine, it's like you have the Roman Empire, and now it is diminished to like this tiny little city.
yeah, but the funny part about it is that like they're so different, right? Like when we think of the Roman Empire, like the idea of Italy didn't really exist.
Yeah.
It was just more of like, at best, what Count von Metternich described in the Congress of Vienna was that Italy was more of a geographic expression than a real thing. Like the idea that Italy is theoretically you could territorially design in Italy, but that doesn't mean that it is actually a country, right?
Wow.
And
In terms of what? Culture?
yeah, like the things that unify a people, like, and there's a lot of arguments, and I'm certainly, I think, on the side of the people arguing against the unification of Italy for why.
But doesn't the language unify them? Like,
No, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, it's certainly for a long time, there were more dialects in Italy than any other country in Europe.
wow.
The Italian language was really only born and codified with Dante, which was, only like 600 years ago, like 600 years ago.
And they spoke Latin, and they spoke different.
Yeah, well, they spoke like in Italic language, but like it was not like for English, right? There's a development of the English language, and then a codifying of what the language was, like what the grammar rules were, the spelling of words, like the grammatical structure that was proper, all of that like defines how a language is foundationalized, right? And in Italy, that didn't happen really until Dante sort of almost created the Italian language. Like he sort of became like the baseline for like a lot of the grammatical rules and how the language was laid out and structured and stuff like that. Because Italian really, but the version he spoke was only narrowly confined to a very small corner of Italy, right? And that while some sort of Italic languages were spoken in most of the other regions you would consider Italy now, extremely different in terms of dialects, and people from one side of Italy could not understand people from the other side. There are people on, Italy's a boot, right? You have people on this side of the Apennines, on this side of the boot, who couldn't understand people on the other side of the mountain.
Okay.
On this side of the boot, right?
Not from south
like
to north.
this, but this to this, right? East to west.
Yeah.
Where the divide isn't very long as mileages goes. But because Italy is such a mountainous country,
Yeah.
and not we talk about all roads leading to Rome, but infrastructurally Italy has always been chronically undeveloped, even during those days where these communities all lived in this isolation, right, in the mountains, really existing for themselves, and there wasn't really a lot of like larger sense of Italianism in Italy, right? That was forced. That was a political creation to justify uniting Italy.
Wow.
It was not an organic thing. Like when you think of countries like Germany becoming a united country at this exact same time, that was also really, it was a lot less forced, but it was certainly a coerced thing, the unification of Germany in one country. But it was also like when Germany became a country, it was like federalized, right? Like the only way they could get these other German principalities on board with creating one country was that each distinct region would basically still be autonomous within a German nation. So Bavaria was still, the Kingdom of Bavaria, the royal families there would still retain their royal titles and princeships and all of that. But in Italy, it was not that kind of process. It was very...
and then you had the French as well in influencing Italy.
Yeah. And that was, there's a big part of that history that is still an unrectified part of that story. But I mean, like the thing that also made Italy really different from a country like Germany was like how many different political institutions and types of governance existed within what we consider Italy today. Like the Republic of Venice had existed for hundreds of years, right, as an independent republic of its own stature, at one point being like the wealthiest city in Europe, right, and having all these outposts and territories across like the Aegean and southern Italy and North Africa,
Wow.
Being its own thing and being a republic for hundreds of years, governed with not necessarily democracy, but through more direct representation and electorate, and those institutions were ancient and the sacrosanct part of being a Venetian, right? They were proud of that history and that heritage. Same thing with Genoa on the other coast of Italy. All these places really did have like their own institutions, and Florence, same kind of deal, like
How about the Vatican?
yeah, exactly. The Papal States, which were like basically all of central Italy at this time, definitely obviously had their own, institutions politically, and a very long history of them having.
But is the Vatican part of Italy or is it an independent
It is
country?
technically an independent country under basic nominally a part of Italy, but definitely, considered its own sovereign nation, but with the understanding that it literally exists completely within Italy and would not be able to support itself without the existence of the Italy that is all around it, of course. So,
Of course, yeah. But they also support the Italian state, no?
yeah, well, of course. I mean,
taxation.
the influence that the Catholic Church has, being, the Catholic Church obviously has a big impact on an extremely Catholic country,
Yeah.
and they've definitely wielded that influence since Italy become a country, to threaten or cajole the government into, doing things it may want more in line with than what the government's thinking as a way of.
Now you're given unlimited budget. You can choose any actors, actresses, you can DP yourself, or you can have, I don't know, any Chivo, or you can have, anybody.
Can I bring him back from the dead? bring some old deepens back.
Who will you bring back from the dead then?
Oh man. I think Vadim Yusuf would be awesome. He was he DP'd a lot of Tarkovsky's movies.
Okay.
Always loved that visual style. Would be super cool. This is a hard one because I've like thought about stuff like this, like to put in my pocket, right? Because I did screenwriting through school, and I like for our senior project, I wrote a full-length feature film, right? Like the tools and capacities were there, and there's a lack of storytelling desire. So I've definitely given something like this a lot of thought. But the problem is there's so many things I would just love to do. Right?
Okay, but pick one.
I would love to make a TV show like a multi-episode TV show, a multi-season even ideally, about the German campaign in Africa during World War One, because it is not only such an a very lowly understood part of the World War conflict in general by like the general populace, but the story is just so fascinating, and it has so many facets. Like, to me, it's not like I want to do it just because it's so cool, you know, like the most successful guerrilla campaign in history, and you know, he never lost a battle. Like, that stuff is cool, but there's so many intricate like social elements in there and moral conundrums, because there was also by, you know, nature of war, you know, a lot of native casualties in that war, a lot of native forced labor, you know, the effects on the, what is, you know, now Tanzania, but at the time was German East Africa, you know, were immense on the population, and it really decimated the country, the war that was being fought there. And, you know, definitely some not great things, but, you know, was not also so clear cut that like, oh, you know, the Germans are bad guys and they're just like murdering the locals, because it definitely wasn't really that either, you know. To me, the moral grayness of it, as well as the just the fascinating general story of fighting a 4-year war completely cut off from home, with only the army you have at your disposal when it all begins, and successfully surviving and resupplying, fighting battles against, at this, they're completely surrounded, right, by Portugal, by Belgium, by England, France off the coast, in Madagascar. Like, all of their enemies in World War One surround their colony with their own colonies, right? And so the German colony really never stood a chance in general, because there was no way they were ever going to keep a colony supplied overseas like that during a global war where they didn't dominate the seas. But the sheer tenacity of leadership and survival in that story, just the hard fought nature of it, the wiliness of the general Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck to fight this campaign and to technically never lose a battle the entire war, and to surrender only after, you know, getting the confirmation that the war had ended, several weeks after the war had ended, you know, because it takes a while for news to get to Africa, you know, especially when they're in the middle of the jungle in, you know, what they were in Portuguese territory, I think, at the time that they surrendered. So they had actually managed to escape German East Africa and invaded Portuguese Mozambique, I believe is what it was. And that's where they were found at the end of the war, when they were officially like, hey, the war's over, you know, this, you know, we can,
And they just went back home?
yeah.
Wow.
But like, so much of that army was also made up of like native soldiers and stuff, and had
They were
native
recruited
officers.
through.
Yeah, and they took a lot of pride in being
But
German
that's
soldiers.
so weird,
Yeah, they had a lot of
because
pride.
they're Africans.
Yeah.
And then you fighting for a German racist
He was, I mean, in World War One, like, Lettow-Vorbeck wasn't necessarily an especially racist guy.
Okay.
You know, and
So the Aryan pride was not.
oh yeah,
so
I think, yeah, that's, I mean, more World War II kind of stuff. But in World War One, it was, you know, you definitely had a lot of prevailing attitudes about race and stuff, but that was more like a general European-wide kind of thing, you know, like a baseline European racism about, you know, white superiority over like the poor underdeveloped people of their colonies. But him, you know, nobody was especially bred of that kind of like hateful, intentionally malicious kind of racism. And, you know, for him, it was like this the act of survival. I think there was only a couple of hundred actual like German soldiers that were with his army when they were cut off. The rest were thousands of natives, but they took a lot of pride in being part of the German military, and
they're winning.
yeah, and they were, you know, they were extremely disciplined, and they fought incredibly bravely, and he gave them so much accolade, and he fought for them to get military pensions till the end of his life, which he died in like in the 60s, I want to say.
Wow.
You know, and he was a, you know, military commander in World War One in you know 1914 and 1918. But you know, there's a really cool story where they the West German government finally decides that they will do it, which is shortly after Vorbeck has passed away, and so they go to Tanzania, which, you know, again used to be German East Africa, to try and find some of these surviving old soldiers from, you know, 50 years ago who fought. But all these men, obviously living in these rural villages and stuff, and poor infrastructure towns. After 50 years, they don't really have, you know, as much, like, they don't necessarily all have their German identification papers from when they were in the military and all this stuff. But somebody came up with the idea of doing the I believe it was the Haya Safari, which was like their marching song that they used to do. And they all, to a man, 50 years later, all did it right then and there. And they all got
Wow.
military pensions and pay and stuff like that. Even in, 50 years on, the German military government acknowledged
Wow.
that contribution and paid them.
That is an incredible story.
It's crazy. And, there's so much more to it.
Nobody has done it.
No, but I'm
not even close to it.
No, I'm like, this would be like a great TV show, right? Because there's so many facets to it, so many people involved, a lot of key characters who are prevalent throughout the whole story. There's a part of the story where the German Navy has a cruiser in the area when war breaks out, which is obviously never going to get back to Germany. So it's like seconded to his army. And so they take this whole Navy cruiser up the river into the heart of Tanzania, the country, via the river, and basically turn it into a floating fort. Because the only way it can be sunk is either by land or by another ship coming up the delta, right? But they've got a prepared position, they've got it sighted, they've mined the whole approach. They didn't just drive in 3 miles up the delta into Tanzania. They drove dozens, hundreds of miles as far as the river would allow the ship to go into the heart of Tanzania, and they had to be unrooted. And it was one of the earliest successful use of aerial attack to sink a naval vessel, because ultimately that is how it was done by some old biplanes that had to be shipped in from Europe, just a couple of them with a couple of bombs strapped to them. Had to find the ship, bracket it, weaken it, and then attack it and finally sink it. But even after that happened, Vorbeck was just like, all right, we're going to strip the ship of guns, and we're going to turn those guns into artillery pieces now. All of them, the sailors on the ship are now just, part of the infantry. They're with us, and just maximizing resources, gutting this ship. And that ship was still in use by the Tanzanian government for decades, until I think the 90s. They refloated the ship and used it as a ferry across Lake Victoria in Tanzania for another 70, 80 years.
Wow, that's fascinating.
It's
not only amazing that it's great for movie making, making a TV show, but I have this sense that looking at history kind of helped us to understand our present, to understand our future. What do you think your passion for history has also kind of defined some of the decisions you made, or some of the visions of your worldview and how you see the present and the future as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are really attracted to this idea that history repeats itself. And I feel like that's kind of taking the responsibility away that we have as people. And I think what history does is allow us to just see patterns of human behavior in a chronological way, I guess. In these kinds of situations, what kind of decisions do certain kind of people make, which is the most informative thing that history can do for understanding modern times, right? Similar people under similar circumstances, how did they react to their circumstances in their time, and what factors are different that have an impact for how we react now, and what ones are the same, that stuff to me is endlessly fascinating. And a big part of why I love history, because not only seeing the parallels to today, but as I said, it's not about see, even Italy was struggling with how to fight fascists in 1921, it's less that and more okay, so here's where the failure was structurally, societally, governmentally, that allowed these kinds of situations that at many steps could have just been put a stop to. At many, many different junctions could have just been ended with the signing of a piece of paper that allowed it to balloon and become the thing it would become.
Or the wars that started by relationships,
right.
Crazy personal events that sparked years and years of conflict.
Yeah, and that's definitely a whole other beast.
But pushing the button to another. But currently there's a kind of a movement of rewriting history, kind of reinterpreting history. How do we really stay faithful to the facts and know that you can't just reinterpret history to accommodate to your own beliefs?
Yeah, and here's the hard part is we talk about that in a very current sense. We've always done that.
Okay.
Since the beginning of the idea of historiography, the idea of documenting history, from Herodotus, who's considered the first historian, that is literally all history has been, is people reinterpreting what they believe happened, right? And either it's firsthand accounts, and then a generation or two later, different people who were never there, who could have never lived it, seeing those same things and seeing them in a different light, right? And their understanding of it and how it affects the world they live in now, right? That is just part of history.
Wow.
And it's not necessarily, I think rewrite is a hard word, although that definitely happens, and it's important to acknowledge that. It's less, we see history through a new lens, through the times that we're in, right? And sometimes it's easy to see the same story that we've had accessible since it happened, but in the times we're in, pull a different message out of it, right? Like in the same way, you watch a movie at one point in your life and maybe it doesn't affect you very much, but you watch it 15 years later and it makes you cry, right? And it stays with you. You know, it's that exact same principle of like, it's where we're at in the world, the things we're going through, the growth or regressions that we have done, the struggles we face, and putting that through the lens of history itself, to try and to better understand what we're dealing with now, right? And sometimes the best resource you have for that is the whole of human history before us, right? The gravity of the billions of people that have existed before us, who, you know, our situations are never unique. Like, facets of it are always unique, you know, but we're never the first people to experience economic strife and political upheaval, you know, and cultural changes brought on by technology and all this stuff. Like, you know, obviously there's so much precedence in so many different places in the world where these things have had to be dealt with by people in history, and being able to look back and, as I was just talking about, you know, talk about how did they respond? What was that like? How did that affect like familial structures, the kinds of things people were interested and not interested in artistically and culturally, in terms of the kind of work that was being done, the kind of work people were pursuing, you know, where people wanted to live. You know, all of that stuff is so determined by the world we live in, and using that world we live in and looking back into the past to try and better understand what we go through now.
Yeah, that's definitely a fascinating conversation when it comes to, and I know that every time we talk about history, I'm like, oh, wow, awesome. And I listen to The Rest is History and some other podcasts, but nothing like, you know, having this exchange where you're actually, you know, interacting.
Absolutely.
But when we met, it wasn't only history, but we were, you know, working together, filming together. I remember that during that time, I was not only working in that particular movie that we worked together, but some of the weekends I was working with my friend Diego in his movie. And so the distance, and we were pulling like 14, 16-hour shifts sometime because of the conditions of that particular project. And at what time I was driving home, and I remember driving home, stopping at a traffic light, and then thinking, how did I get here? Like, I don't remember when I left and how I got here. Other times I would come home, park in the driveway, and passed out. And I would wake up at 5 a.m, like, where am I? Oh, I have to go to set now.
Yeah.
And like we've talked before, you know, kind of like sleeping in the parking lot of the crew, just because the conditions that made it, and it makes it also very unhealthy for physically, mentally. But those experiences of, you know, almost like near death experiences driving, have you had anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, my fair share. I mean, for me, like, again, like, I was so zealous when I was younger about like pursuing this thing that I was like, just whatever I could do, I was gonna do it to like make this happen, right? And so when I was younger, I was 18. This was only a couple of months after I finally moved out of home. I was still working at the movie theater at the time, which is a job I had in high school, but you know, I wasn't too long out of high school here. And I was doing like long nights, you know, because we have like all these, you know, big releases, you know, at the time when people went to the movie theaters. And, you know, so all these late nights, you know, for me at least, you know, because I'm more of a morning person anyway. And, you know, as a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, you know, being up till like midnight, 1 a.m, working and then going home.
Yeah.
But at the same time, as I had mentioned, I was also working on a local real estate TV show.
Yeah.
And I was like trying to juggle both of those things, which were both, if you were to weigh the hours, probably not so time consuming, but because of the times that we were doing the work was very exhausting. And I was definitely not at that age very qualified to like understand myself and my body's limitations and when to stop. And we had this shoot where we'd gone until like, oh my God, it had to have been like 3 a.m. or something, you know, it was something crazy. For, you know, again, this is like a real estate show. We're just like filming this house, this like multi-million-dollar house that was like on an auction and talking about it and all this stuff. For some reason we did it, and I don't know, but it was long hours, and I remember the day being done and I was just so beat. And that wasn't the worst. It was a very long drive home, and I made it home that night. But I had to get up a few hours later and drive back to my job at the theater. And it was a really hot August day. My car did not have very good air conditioning. And it was just one of those days where the combination of the tiredness, the fatigue, just the stress I wasn't dealing with very well, the heat, and I got really drowsy driving. And it was so clean of a transition that I didn't even realize I had done it, and I'd fallen asleep. And I had veered, and once I'd fallen asleep, off the road and plowed through, and I was probably going about 60 miles per hour when this happened. And I plowed through the steel guardrail on the other side of the road, and my car flipped into a ditch and rolled over itself and caught on fire.
No.
And I woke up right as I hit the steel guardrail, which was a flash moment in my brain that lives forever for how terrifying it was, you know? And there was the only thing that went through my brain as I was careening in those brief couple of seconds was to like tuck my head. And I don't know why. But I'm glad I did, because when the car rolled, the roof caved in right where my head was. And if I hadn't tucked my head, it would have smashed my body like an accordion, like this right on my head, or broken my neck. But thankfully, as it was, I was fairly unscathed, right? Like the car comes to a stop, and immediately, without even thinking, I don't know how I did it, I got my seatbelt out. I couldn't kick open the door all the way because I was in a ditch, so the angle prevented my door from opening all the way. I still somehow managed to squeeze out of the car and just clambered up the road to the side of the ditch. I was just standing there in like pure shock, right? Unable to like process what had just happened. And I look back, and my car is smoking. It's starting a fire. And this is the area of Utah that is still like all dry brush, and it's August, right? And the brush is starting to catch fire. And I'm just standing on the side of the road on this backwater road, which is Bacchus Road for those familiar with Utah. And there's one guy on the road who had seen me do this. Okay. Who was going the other way, and he was like a security guard or something, but he like pulled over. I hardly even remember the exchange. He's like, "Oh my gosh, are you okay? I saw the whole thing." And I was just so dazed. I was just like standing there looking off in the distance, and I was just like mumbling. And he called the cops, and the cops showed up, and the fire truck showed up, because at this point my whole car was on fire. And they were trying to prevent the fire from spreading, out of the bush into the farmland that was next to it. And it was crazy. And what was even crazier was that my family drove past the scene of the accident while all of this was going on, while the lane was shut down to one road, or the road was shut down to one lane, and the fire truck is actively trying to put out this fire. But they can't see the car. They didn't see who it was. They just drove past because our home wasn't more than 10 minutes up the road from there. Yeah, and then very shortly after, got a call to come to the site of an accident because I had had an accident, and then found out where it was, and immediately turned back around and found out that the accident they had just driven past a few minutes ago was me. It was where I was, and in what feels very comedic to me now, at the time, because I would get in my uniform at work, I was wearing pajamas. I was wearing like some Iron Man or Marvel pajama pants and like just like a red pajama shirt or something at the time that this crash happened. And so I'm just standing there in bright colors, all cartoonish looking, in my shock on the side of the road, and then just like sobbing while there's just a giant ignited car burning right behind me, which in my brain is a hilarious picture now. But 12 years ago when that crash happened, man, was incredibly traumatic, because there is way fewer ways that I survived that than ways that I should have died during that crash. Like, yeah, pictures of the car, when I show it to people, people are like, "I don't know how you survived that crash. Like, your car is completely totaled in this picture." I don't know how I did it either. The only thing I remember was ducking my head at one point as it was rolling, and if I hadn't, would have gotten smushed when the roof caved in. It was madness. But it was an important moment for me. I mean, it's like, I didn't necessarily move out of home on the best of terms, but the near-death experience allowed me and my mom to come back together and have a good relationship, and it's been amazing ever since then, But it was a good moment for, I think, both of us to, the temporariness of existence and all this stuff. And so there's a lot of good that came out of it in terms of me having a better understanding of what is too far in terms of the limit, like,
Yeah.
and not to push yourself. And it's one of the reasons why now I will, I will sleep in my car when we get off after a certain hour instead of driving home, because when I was 18, I learned a very hard lesson that I'm
But
not
it's
keen to
still,
learn again.
that's not the only thing that I found is particular to an industry that affects, a lifestyle. And we've talked about this before, and is the fact that, you have your family, your two kids, your wife, and it seems like it's very hard to have a family, and not only have a family, but also maintain that family, sustain that relationship when you're working in this industry with, a lot of the things that could affect your relationships, being just the workload or the type of lifestyle that many people choose to live, and how that can affect you. How do you prioritize family even with your passion for film in this industry?
I mean, you just gotta learn to live purposely. And it's something that's so much easier said than done, like it's really easy to sit here and be like, make time for these things, make conscious choices in your life about the things that you care about. But it's a much harder thing to practice, especially in an industry that demands so much of your attention, like the film industry, like a lot of industries, like it. But before I was ever full time in the film industry, even though I've always been pursuing a career in film, I was married and had a kid before I was ever full time in the film industry. So for me, the priority was always that I wanted to have a family. It was an important thing to me. But on the inverse side of it, like when my wife and I started dating, like I told her straight up, I was like, look, the road I'm following, not famous for being super stable. Like just want to, establish that groundwork now. If this is going to work, just the understanding that, look, I got weird hours. I got weird things I got to do for work, weird obligations that kind of come with the territory. And it's not the most reliable field of work there is, and I'm going to try my best to be reliable, but by the nature of the beast, it's not always going to be that way, but it's learning, the hard lesson, right? I think you kind of have to have experiences that force you to confront your priorities in order for those kind of lessons to stay with you. And I know for me, like when we moved here, and I was very thankful to find success working in the film industry here, and I was working nonstop, right? Like the lesson I learned at 18, I was unlearning at 25, 26, when I was just like working 30 days straight sometimes, just bouncing, like music video today, a different music video tomorrow, a movie this day, once that movie's over, this commercial shoot, blah, blah, just like literally no days off at some point for like a month straight. Just pushing to provide, and do all of that. But there came a time where my son was due to be born. And I had been doing a stint of shows that whole year before he was born that was basically just all night work, just like all overnight work for about 7 months straight that year. And that took a massive toll on my body and my health. Like it's just, I was not meant for that, like it wasn't the nature of the work itself. It was just my circadian rhythm never was able to catch on. Like it was impossible. Like I'm just the kind of person where the second you feel the kiss of sunlight, you're awake, you're alive, you got energy. So driving home at the sunrise every day, it was like, yeah, I don't know how I'm going to bed, like, so you're just never getting enough sleep. You're not recuperating. Your body's not finding a rhythm. It's not settling into things. It's not recalibrating to achieve those things. And it hit basically near the end of that 7-month show, which was coming up on just a few weeks before my son was born, that I started having these like crazy heart palpitations. They just would not stop. Like my heartbeat was arrhythmic, and it was freaking me out. It's like I literally, my heart can't beat like in rhythm. It just is so out of pace. It won't stop pounding heavily, And I like told my best boy, I was like, I feel like something is really wrong. And he had me checked out by the medic, and the medic was like, he's like, I could call you an ambulance. I think you're probably well enough to drive yourself to the ER, but you should definitely go to the hospital and see what's going on. And I did. I spent, oh my God, I was in the ER for like 18 hours waiting to be seen. It was miserable. And the whole time, just the palpitations, like feeling like I'm going to die, like I'm having a heart attack or something, just sitting in the waiting room. Finally get seen and I get checked out, and they're like, yeah, you have this arrhythmia, you can help kind of steady your heart rate and all this stuff. And they're like, we recommend, next week you go see like a primary care physician and all this stuff. And so I did, I did. I went the next week and got a checkup and met with my doctor, and he was like, I think that your body is just rejecting your lifestyle. He's like, first of all, I need to put you on vitamin supplements because you haven't been in enough sun all year. Your body is deficient. He's like, but I think the stress and lack of energy is just really wearing your body to the core. And he was like, and also I feel like you have anxiety problems. And I was like, oh my gosh, maybe I do. That's crazy. Like, I had never really thought about that. Like, I'd never really thought of myself as that kind of person who struggled with those kinds of things. Although in hindsight, clearly very much did. But, you don't really see it for the trees because you can't really self-understand these things, I think, until you have the language to articulate them. And so for me, like, the idea of what anxiety is wasn't what I thought I was experiencing until I talked to a doctor and then got on meds for anxiety. And I went, oh my God, this is what life is supposed to have been like every day, my whole life. Like, wow. This is how I was supposed to feel all the time. It was crazy. And like, all this happened like right before the birth of my son. Right. But it was a really good time to be like, I'm bringing a new kid into this world. This is a really good moment to just reflect on the past couple of weeks of health issues and realizations about like my mental health and stuff like that, and how to go forward better. Right? Because clearly this going 110 miles an hour, overworking yourself every day to prove a point about, your value and all this stuff is not really worth it. Like, what are you really proving? Certainly nothing to my kids who, miss seeing their dad.
Yeah.
Regardless of, the money you bring home, like that's, kids don't necessarily really care much about that, which is good. So yeah, it was great. Like, my son came into this world and I just felt like I was a new person at that moment as I was discovering I had these anxiety issues that I could begin to understand and research, and had some medication to help me stabilize, and was doing more for my health. Because then that show thankfully ended like a few weeks after my son was born, and I had a couple of months off to just recover and recuperate and
focus,
be more choosy about the kind of projects I might want to do. It's certainly nothing of that type of schedule for that much time again.
I don't know how it's been for you, but for me, I came into this industry thinking at first, man, I want to work in movies and want to, do the Hollywood thing. And who knows, maybe I can become the next Dickens, the next Chivo. And at one point, I came to terms with, like, I'm not going to be that, It's not only the time, but it's also like the pursuit. Like, I'm okay with not being that, still working in an industry that I like, because I don't want to compromise certain things that I have value more than that success ladder. I don't know if it has been with you in terms of like becoming a gaffer in the industry, not necessarily DPing all the time and looking for these things. Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, man. I mean, I think there just has to come a point, where you have that assessment of your priority, and for me, it was a similar kind of thing. I was like, I want to be the best. I want to learn it all. I want to do the best work, and I want the recognition for it. And then, after a while, man, I don't know, there's just a shift, and it could be just from so many different factors, from family and life experiences, from just maybe getting a little jaded from having done it so much, where that stops feeling so important, like you have other things worth having in your life. I think at some point where needing those kinds of things, really falls down on the priority list pretty far, and then you just get to a point where you're like, I just want to do good work. I want to feel good about the work I do. I want to continue to improve and be able to see that improvement, but without it being the kind of thing where you're driving for the top of the pyramid all the time whenever you're doing anything, and that's exhausting, man. This industry is a game. I get it. And it's a very competitive industry. There's a lot of people who want to get in it, and there's just not enough room for all those people, but there's a way of being where you can go about it without it, having to consume you, without it affecting the kind of relationships you can build, because you're always in that mindset, and I think that really gets to a lot of people, man. Like, I got to a point where I was like, I just want to be a good collaborator. I want to be the kind of guy people can rely on for their professional opinion, for their expertise, that we can come together to make good decisions that we're really happy with, something we can high five each other about when we see it. You go, yeah, man, that was awesome. We pulled that off, and that's, the high you live for, pulling that kind of stuff off and just feeling good at the end of the day about the stuff you put together. But, it's no longer like the drive for, I'm going to make this Oscar winner, I'm going to work on, this Tribeca, the audience favorite movie, and everybody's going to know my name, and, I'm going to have an agency now. And, next thing I know, I'll be Rachel Morrison doing Black Panther, and
Rachel Morrison will
yeah, you realize like, I don't, that's not necessarily what I actually want, In some ways that's nice. You're like, oh, look, I wouldn't complain much about the money they get for doing this.
Yeah, yeah.
But, the work, the nature of what you're trying to get out of the work, I think evolves. And if you do it right, it evolves for the better, man. Like, I think you do better work when you escape that zone too, because you genuinely are just focused on being somebody good to work with learning your craft because you care about it, and not in a way that's like showmany or egotistical or trying to one up the people around you. It's just about the love of the game. It's about the craft and just enjoying what you bring to the table with the craft that you care about, your corner of the industry.
And in terms of the craft, why did you choose the path of lighting and gaffing as opposed to necessarily working on camera department? Because I know you're familiar with this, where people are like, oh, that's a great picture, man. Man, that phone takes amazing. Or like that camera, oh, that camera is insane, bro.
Stop doing that. Yeah, man, totally. It's like, there came a point to me where, like, because I was in camera for a really long time. I was a first AC, I was a camera operator. I did a lot of stuff, and I did a lot of indie DP work for a long time too. But there was just like a point where I was like, the thing I really care about most in all this is light. Like, light is the one element of all these things that makes me the most excited, and it's the one thing I believe has the biggest impact on the artistic integrity of an image. And
How so?
like, for me, if you were to boil it down in an incredibly simplistic way, I would say that if you had a great camera and terrible lighting, you would not have a great image. And if you had a terrible camera and great lighting, you would still have a great image. You could have a mediocre composition with incredible lighting and you have a great image. You could have a great composition with garbage lighting and it's not a good image.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and it's not because lighting is better. It's just because by nature of the medium of light, that is what we as humans have been painting art with for millennia.
And three-dimensionality of it.
Yeah, the impact it I mean, since people have been painting in caves by the light of fire, like the medium of using light to tell stories, to craft an image, to craft something beautiful, to craft a story has been a big part of human expression forever. And I'm certainly most drawn to that element of it. I feel most drawn toward that contribution of the image because it's something I feel like I have a more direct hand in. Like, the camera was really technical, and it definitely scratched a certain part of my brain with the technicality of it and understanding, like how to measure like the circle of confusion and hyperfocal distance, and then, shim sizes and all that, like calibrating lenses, like that stuff was all very fascinating on a technical level for me. But I was just always wanting to like feel the artistic investment in the final image. And in camera, you don't necessarily get that. And to a sense, you have a bit of that as an operator. You definitely have that as a DP. But, in the rest of the camera department, your contribution is extremely technical and extremely important. But your impact on the image creatively is much, much smaller than it is in lighting, right?
Yeah.
And to me, that's the contribution I want to make. I want to paint with that light and do that part to bring an image alive with that.
And some DPs really give you the freedom to, it's not like, I want you to do, it's like, I want to create this mood or this scene.
Yeah.
And some, they just give you free to run with it.
Oh, that's my favorite. I mean, because sometimes like when you have that trust and you've built that relationship with a DP, even a DP, like one of my favorite DPs was a great guy named Alex Allgood. Hope you're watching, buddy. But he has a lighting background too. But he's also really good in working DP, and he still, despite his extensive lighting knowledge and his background he has in it, gives me the least direct demand of virtually any DP I work with, because he understands, having come from that side of it, having the trust in your gaffer, having been a gaffer and wanting his DP to offer him that trust. He gives it very freely because we've built that bond. And it sometimes, my favorite is when it's as simple as like, I'm going to be putting the camera here for a medium on her sitting in that chair. it's daytime. You know, the windows are on that side, so it probably makes sense to motivate, you know, whatever daylight is from that side. You know, let's try and be ready to shoot in 10. Like, and that's it. That's all they give me. And that's my favorite part, because then it's like doing my part to create the some of the artistic side of the image, to go, okay, where is the light coming from? What angle is it coming from? What else is it hitting? What is it reflecting off of? You know, what kind of colors in this space are refracting off of like the texture of the furniture, stuff like that, you know, and like, where is it important that we fill in? What is important that we see, you know, to like do all of that part. How do we do this in a way that, you know, doesn't distract from the performance, but still enhances the beauty of the image and what we're trying to say? All of that in like a 10-minute span, you know, to set up just one of 40, 50 shots we're going to be doing that day, you know, and then just continuing that cycle. But to me, that's like the most exciting part. Like, it definitely, like, you definitely work with DPs who maybe struggle with the trust issues, or, you know, who feel, and to me, the larger problem is that in the digital age, we have unfortunately burdened DPs with the expectation that they need to have all those answers, that they need to be the experts, that they have to make those calls, which is not how it has historically ever been or needed to be. But in the digital age, we sort of dump that on their shoulders. So you get a lot of these DPs, especially younger ones, who feel like they have to say, I want a light mat for, you know, over there in that corner, you know, and give me a tube back here, you know, for a backlight, and then just put this light here and point it this way. And for me, that's like, those are the worst days at work, because, you know, it's like, okay, well, what am I really here for? Like, you didn't even need me here. You have my guys whose job is to do that when I tell them to do, you know, who just put the thing here because they were told to, and just pointed at that person, boom, bam, done. But like, where's the artistic involvement? Where's the collaboration? And for me, it's very frustrating. And I'll be honest, sometimes even as a gaffer, I struggle to hide this frustration, because I'm like, just clue me into the picture here. Like, what are we doing? Like, when you tell me put a light mat 4 here, that doesn't tell me anything about what we're shooting, what we're achieving, what happens in this scene. Sometimes it's literally just the necessity of the technical information about what's happening in the scene. He's like, put this light mat 4 here. I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. And then, you know, we do the shot, and it's like she stands up and walks across the room. And then, you know, they cut, and he's like, well, she falls, you know, she gets really dark when she goes over there. I could have prevented all of that if you had just told me what was happening. If we had blocked it, if we had walked through, if you had just clued me in on what we were going to try and achieve, I could have solved all your problems for you without you having to think about it. But because sometimes they're so insistent on just like, put this light here, and then it doesn't work out. And the problem, the person at fault when it doesn't work out is always me, right? Like, that's sort of the nature of the job. Like, because the DP has so many responsibilities, and they sit fairly high in the food chain. A lot of the times, especially depending on the medium of film you're working in, whether it's movies or commercial, you know, the expectations and the responsibilities will fall differently. Yeah, right. The responsibilities will fall in a different place. But, you know, it's very easy to like just be like, and I've definitely had my fair share of this, where the DP is like, oh, you know, he'd turn around and be like, oh, you know, the gaffer, you know, we should have done something different with the lighting for this, you know. I'm like, you son of a. But, you know, you got to give me that agency. Like, that's my job. That's what I'm here for. I'm an expert in this thing to solve your problems for you, so you can think about the stuff that enhances your job, right? Like, if you're sitting here thinking about where that light needs to go and where that light needs to go, you're not thinking about the storytelling aspect. You're not thinking about what we're trying to say. You're not thinking about the most creative use of composition to convey the emotions of this scene. You're not thinking about all the tiny details. You're not talking with the director about what they're trying to achieve in the scene, right? Yeah. You're literally wasting your time telling me, put a light here, and now nobody's actually achieved anything substantial or artistic, because you've poorly devoted your brain power and resource allocation to the wrong place. Like, again, give me, like, I mean, for one, yes, like, do the proper thing and give me a rehearsal, but like, give me 30 seconds of your time and let's talk about what we're trying to do here, so that I can go bang that out. And by the time you're ready, I promise I'll be ready. And, you know, if we got to make some changes, we'll feedback them. We'll change those real fast in real time, and we'll shoot this thing. But if that process doesn't happen, what'll happen is what I was just talking about. She gets up, walks across the room. Now she's dark. Okay, well, now you're waiting on me, you know, in between this setup now, to bring in a new light, make sure that, you know, she's well exposed to that light now makes sense. You know, all of that now has to be done. And you're just waiting on lighting for that to happen in order to shoot this again. So now everybody's standing around waiting for me. I look like the jerk, right? I look like the reason why the day's not getting made. because that stuff has to be worked out. Like that has to be purposeful. And I think the hardest part about digital filmmaking is the expediency of it has really affected our ability to be purposeful with what we're doing, right? Like it's so easy to just autopilot it and say, you know, medium shot, close up, just give a nice wrap on the face here, boom, done. And there's nothing completely wrong with that. Like on a project by project basis, sometimes that's all it needs. That's all it calls for. And you don't have to overcomplicate it. But, you know, there's so many times, especially like I'm mostly talking about movies here.
It's narrated.
You know, 85% of my background. But, you know, in a movie, you're usually trying to achieve something more. You're trying to do something more artistic. You're trying to say something. You're trying to present an argument, you know. And that is only possible by allowing the artistic levers to be pulled by the people who are best qualified to be pulling on those, you know? Like, you shouldn't have to do that as the DP. And as I said, I think the problem is in the digital age, we've created that expectation. Like 20 something years ago, you know, you didn't have this idolization of DPs that exists now, right? Like it was a bit more of a niche job, a job.
Another technical
hand, right? Like you didn't have idols of cinematography that like anybody who worked in film was like, oh yeah, you know, I'm like a Deacon's Die Hard, you know, like that wasn't a thing. You didn't have idols of that kind, but like digital cinematography made the moving image available to so many people who wanted to be moving image curators, who, you know, unfortunately we're not given good expectations or knowledge base on what their job really was and the things that should and shouldn't matter to them, you know, and how this is a team sport. And in team sport, you got to let the goalie, you know, block the goal.
Yeah.
You don't, you know, if you got your striker out there constantly falling back to try and block the goal, like you guys ain't putting any ports on the board, you know, all you're doing is just doubling up on the effort and nobody's gonna be happy. Nobody's gonna be getting those goals. And that's really the beauty of this craft is how finely tuned it has been developed over 100 years of what these people do, what their contribution is, why it's important that is one person's job specifically to focus on, right? And that's why the credit crawl in a movie can be 10, 15 minutes long with thousands of names in it. And every one of those people has a very important job that they do specifically, something that they are a specialist in, something they're extremely qualified in, something that their individual contribution brings value with it, you know? And if that wasn't how the process worked, you wouldn't have all those people, right? You could condense the whole thing down into like 6 people and every person, and AI. And every person has like 8 jobs and stuff, which, you know, sometimes on indies, that's how they try and make it work. But for me, when on an indie, I always try to convince production. So like, it's not money grubbing when I tell you that like, we should approach this in a different way. I'm not like, you know, I need more guys because I'm just trying to like give my guys days and money, you know, like just like trying to put money in my pocket with like gear rentals and stuff. It's like, no, these are the things we need because I care about these projects. And sometimes my problem is that I do care. And sometimes I care too much. Like sometimes I'll get so invested in a project that I think I'm caring more than, you know, the people in charge of it, which means I get very frustrated at decisions they make that I feel like are sabotaging the quality of the project we're making, you know? So, you know, and it's a balancing act because, you know, production obviously can't give you everything. And there are always limitations in terms of the scope, in terms of the resources available. And that's part of the job. That's part of the fun is the limitations. But, you know, it's definitely always heartbreaking to like go in, have these ideas, have these plans, you know, sit down with the producers and say, okay, cool. I think I could do this. You give me 2 guys, you know, or 1 guy, give me also, you know, a programmer. It would be great. This is the value they bring. This is why I think it's important. This is how much time it's going to save us having this person here. And these pieces of gear, I think, will allow us to tell the best story based on my talks with the DP about the movie we're trying to make, the mood we're trying to set, the things we're trying to achieve. I think this is what we need to make that happen and feel best about the product we make at the end of this, right? And then, you know, as I said, then it can be really disheartening when they come back and be like, oh, I don't really care about all that. You know, we're just going to rent like this generic 1-ton package and whatever's on there is what we'll use, you know, and then on the day it's just like, well, why aren't you guys moving faster? It's like, well, the expectations are pretty high for us to achieve this stuff when I don't have the manpower and I don't have the actual right tools to do this thing, you know, and it just comes from a lack of, I think, the professional courtesy of allowing the professional to be the professional. And I think this is something that affects us right now in a larger sense too in society. But you know what we deal with it mostly is definitely like in our work when we let the people who are specialists in what they do be specialists in what they do. Take their advice. They're most likely trying to save you time and resource and headache and do the best work that they can do. Most of the time, that's all they're trying to do, you know? Not to say that there aren't people out there who are just looking to make a couple extra bucks, pad their pockets, you know, stiff you. Obviously that exists. It's a real thing, but it's far less prevalent. And most of the time, I get it. Producers think we're just there to take money out of their pocket and put it in our own. For my experience, all I'm trying to do, man, is help them make the best thing we can. Because I read the scripts and then I got too invested. And I saw too many images in my head that were awesome. And I had too many ideas about how we could pull that off with what meager resources we could cobble together. And then to still have them go, no, we want it to be late.
Yeah. And honestly, and I've heard even Deakins talking about this, where he says a good DP is just as good as his team, you know, his gaffer and grip and electrics and all the people that are part, you know, the camera operators and his team are the ones who make him shine when it comes to, like, although he gets attributed to the success of that department and it's like so much, but you know, this has been a wonderful conversation. I would like to know what is in the future of Justus Page. Maybe a history podcast? Why not?
Man,
maybe
really
you know
thought about it.
So what is in the future and how can people connect to your journey, connect to your story, even work-wise, where people can find you? I know that you mentioned that you're outside of most social medias except for Instagram, but you know, if you can talk about, you know, a little bit of like what's coming for Justus in the future. I really hope that history podcast comes.
I've really thought about it. I've given a lot more thought the past year as I've had more time to sit at home with my kids, thinking, you know, I could do this and I would really enjoy it, I think. But then sometimes I'm like, are there too many podcasts? And then I'm like, well, does it matter if there's too many? You know, just the endless back and forth in my brain of like, because I struggle with like the idea of like, am I actually contributing something, you know, or am I just doing it? And then just, you know, one of 8 billion videos in your algorithm just being spoon fed to you that, you know, the world could have done without, you know, like I constantly go back and forth on that. But I've had some ideas recently about some stuff that I might think about pursuing. And I guess I don't do away too much yet. But, you know, if you've been interested in hearing me talk about history with this silky deep voice, I'm like, yes, I have some ideas on some things that to me are sensible, useful, and informative that I feel qualified to speak on in regards to history. That I might try and do something with, you know, but you know, for me, it's all got to be about that value that it provides, you know, like for me, it's not worth the time investment just to do it for me, just because, you know, with 2 young kids, especially, it's like, I don't got time for that in my life. But, you know, if it's something where I'm like, okay, the information I'm providing is contextual, it's relevant, it's helping people get interested in history and the you know, the sinews that follow through history that bind these things together to why they matter today, right? Like, people don't get interested in history because they don't see the relevance, right? It's a date and a name and an event, and that's it. But when you can contextualize it and make it relevant to people today, I think that's when people care. That's when they get intrigued by it. And I would love to be able to do something where I could do that in some form. So I don't know. We'll see. I mean, you can find me on Instagram, imperial.light. As I said, I'm not super prevalent on social. The whole game of social media, I've talked about with a lot of friends over the years. It drives me nuts because I don't want to feel like I got to justify my existence to the internet in order to do my job. You know, I'm not trying to be a gaffer influencer. I mean, no offense. I got
There's
some
enough
who do that, you know, but like, you know, and kudos to them because some of them do some really informative, great stuff. But, you know, it's not what I'm trying to be. So I don't know. Mostly the stuff I share on my socials is like sometimes snippets of work. Sometimes it's just like me traveling around looking at cool stuff. And I
really cool photography.
I do. Yeah, I do come from a bit of a photography background. So, you know, I do photos and stuff like that. But yeah, man, I don't know. As I said, I've had the thought of expanding my passion of this into something bigger that could be really cool and could maybe have some legs in the kind of social media climate we're in now, but haven't fully committed to it yet. But
we'll see. But we hear it first here beyond the scenes. But thank you, Justus, for coming, sharing with me. Every time we speak, I learn a lot of things beyond history and the work. And you know what I like is when we work together, I feel like I'm bringing a friend, you know, as well to the certain projects. And I know many times I come to you and say, what do you think? Do you think this looks good? Like, I'm very confident in what you bring in. That's part of like the value that each of these parts bring to the production. So thank you for coming, hanging out.
Yeah, and on a quick note, I'll just throw that in there, you know, and that's the thing is like when we do the commercial stuff, like you have so many other things you got to deal with like client and stuff on projects like that. I'm like, homie, just, you know, Tell me what we're doing, and I'll make it happen. Like,
Awesome.
it's part of the process. Friends is trust and enjoying the people you get to go to work with every day.
Great. And if you find also value in these interviews, just remember to share it. And I'll see you in the next episode of Beyond the Scenes.